So at this moment, we're going to call forward Sharon Halperin, who is going to help us with the Martyrology service. The Martyrology service is a time in the service. You can read through it on 337, and there are many, many stories contained within it where we recall the sacrifices and the suffering of the Jewish people in the past. Sharon is the daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors from Poland and Latvia. Her mother survived the war by living in the forests of Poland. Her father escaped from the Riga ghetto in Latvia when his unit was tasked with digging ditches in a nearby forest. Both of her parents fled eastward as the war progressed and met in Russia, where they married. At the end of the war, they lived in several DP camps in Germany, and in 1947, they immigrated to the United States. And Sharon is going to share with us her story and her family's story, the miracles which brought her to this moment, and the things which drive her life's work in educating others about the dangers of genocide and the importance of remembering the Holocaust. Sharon.
Tell me, where can I go? There's no place I can see. Where to go, where to go? Every door is closed for me. My father used to sing this song to me when I was a little girl in New Haven, Connecticut. He used to sing it in English and in Yiddish. Wohin soll ich gehen? Wer kann entfernen mir? Wohin soll ich gehen? As verschlossen's jeder Tier. I grew up speaking Yiddish. In fact, I spoke it before I spoke English. My parents, Aaron and Dora Rosenblatt, were Holocaust survivors. Yiddish was their primary language and was spoken in their homes in Europe before they left, or should I say were forced to leave their homes and their towns when the German armies invaded in 1941. My father was born in 1914 in Latvia in a town called Valdemar Pils by the Baltic Sea. My mother was born the same year in Kurinitz, Poland, not far from the Vilna ghetto, where thousands of Jews were imprisoned and died. World War I began the year they were born. A mere 25 years later, World War II began. I grew up hearing stories, my parents' stories. Stories were all they had. No photographs, no letters, no mementos. They came to America from a DP camp, a displaced persons camp, with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Their stories were therapeutic, cathartic. But stories, like memories, I've learned, change with time. So years ago, I decided to record my parents' stories. Today, I can listen to them on CDs, which is nice because they're no longer alive. Last year, I decided to write it all down in a book so my children and their children can know their stories, undiluted and pure. The book is meant for my family. It's written so that a middle or a high school age child can understand and follow my parents' stories. I decided to title the book Catch a Falling Star. That was the name of another song my father used to sing with me. Catch a falling star and put it in your pocket, save it for a rainy day. Catch a falling star and put it in your pocket, never let it fade away. Falling stars or shooting stars are considered lucky. My parents believed in luck. They believed that together with courage and unwavering hope, luck helped them survive when their families did not. My parents were strong and resilient. They had survived unbelievable hardship. My mother fled her home when the Germans came to the small town of Kurnitz, not far from Vilna, an important spiritual and cultural center, at one point called the Jerusalem of Lithuania. Listening to pleas of a cousin, she went to live at his home in a city called Bialystok. And when the Germans came there, she, her cousin, and their 4 children fled to the woods, the only safe place to hide to avoid being rounded up and deported. The forests of Poland provided cover, but were inhospitable and cold. They hid among frozen, dead bodies and lived in cave-like shelters made out of branches, twigs, and leaves. And when they sensed they needed to move on, they hitched a ride in a farmer's truck and rode east as far as he would take them, towards the border with Russia. During the same time, my father was rounded up with his parents and his 2 sisters, forcibly removed and then deported to the Riga ghetto, not far from their home in Latvia. Because he was young and strong, he was assigned to slave labor, digging ditches where dead bodies were piled like stacks of wood. And when an opportunity arose, he ran. He escaped north, towards Finland, and then east, towards Russia, still wearing his striped uniform with a yellow star. Both of my parents were now running east, and they end up in the same city, Kirov. My parents met in a bakery where my mother worked. They started dating and decided to get married. Yes, people got married during the war. In 1945, the war ended, but they had no home to return to. Tell me, where shall I go? There's no place I can see. Where do people go when they have no home and no belongings? To displaced persons camps, along with 250,000 refugees. These homeless, stateless, war-weary people found a temporary haven in these DP camps. My parents waited for 2 years in various displaced persons camps. They waited for relatives in the United States to learn that they were alive and to begin the arduous process of immigration. Every day, my parents would search lists which were posted on buildings to see if their names were among the fortunate ones who were allowed to immigrate. Finally, they were contacted by a cousin who told them to stay put. She had arranged for another distant relative to sponsor them, promising that he would ensure they would not be a burden to the United States government. They were finally given permission to enter this country, where they were free to practice their Judaism and express their love for Israel, still Palestine until 1948. They were given tickets on the SS Ernie Pyle to travel in the cargo hold, bound for a country that finally opened its doors when other countries continued to turn a blind eye. Now I know where to go, where my folk proudly stand. Let me go to that precious promised land. The Holocaust in my house was not kept secret from me, quite the opposite. I grew up hearing stories of my parents' lives in Europe, lives spent with families and friends. And despite the sadness and overwhelming sense of loss my parents would describe, my childhood memories are filled with laughter, holiday celebrations, the Yiddish theater, and song. My parents were among the fortunate ones because they were able to contain their tear-filled memories and not let it consume them. My parents went to night school to learn English. My father opened up a barber shop, which to me always seemed like a success story. How do you go from escaping a slave labor camp with only the clothes on your back to living in Connecticut, speaking a foreign language, owning a store, and living a comfortable home life. Growing up with parents who had lost their families and homes, who knew the meaning of true hunger, what it feels like to go for days, weeks, months without adequate food, and not to know when this overwhelming feeling of insecurity and danger will end, this definitely had an effect on me. I figured out when I was a young girl that this memory of theirs, this hunger nightmare, was the explanation for them turning the extra bedroom in our home into a pantry of sorts, a storage area for food like cans of tuna and tomato sauce. It was a comfort, I guess, to know that they had something to sustain them, just in case. I remember walking into the New Haven Coliseum when I was a teenager for a pro-Israel rally. I was stunned by the sheer number of people who filled the large arena. Wow, how wonderful it was to be a part of this outpouring of love and support for Zionism. I was warm from the inside out. But quickly, a thought flashed through my mind. Now, this would be a really good place to kill a lot of Jews in one quick strike. To be perfectly honest, I still think like this. I can't help it. It's always there in the back of my mind whenever I'm in a large gathering of Jews. But really, is it all that strange given the news lately and the press releases by the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, and the Southern Poverty Law Center? What's a child of Holocaust survivors to think when the headlines read, largest demonstrations of white supremacists staged in years? White supremacists killed more people than Islamic terrorists. Rising climate of incivility emboldened hate groups. 74% of murders over the last 10 years were carried out by white supremacists. According to the ADL, nearly 2,000 anti-Semitic incidents were reported across the U.S. in 2017, including physical assaults, vandalism, and attacks on Jewish institutions. This figure represents a 60% increase over 2016. What probably saddens me the most in the ADL audit is that the sharp rise in acts of anti-Semitism was in part due to a significant increase in incidents in schools, kindergarten through grade 12, and on college campuses, which nearly doubled for a second year in a row. And remember, these statistics are reported incidents. We know that for every report of bullying and actual violence, there is most likely another act that goes unreported. What am I? What are we supposed to do? These irrefutable sets of statistics that come into our lives at dizzying speed from multiple directions, it's so easy to feel overwhelmed and helpless. No way. No. I have hope. As we conclude the 10 days of penitence and reflection, when we set the tone for the upcoming year, I have hope. Educators in schools have more resources to combat hate, intolerance, and bullying than ever before. Teachers are attending workshops, conferences, and seminars, with some teachers turned away because registrations are filled. Requests for Holocaust survivors and their descendants to come to schools, campuses, and organizations are being turned down. We have difficulty keeping up. Programs and events related to Holocaust education are sold out, with people lining the walls and sitting on floors. Vandalized Jewish cemeteries are being repaired by community members of Muslim and Christian faiths. The United States Congress is passing legislation to federally protect religious institutions against bomb threats. Holocaust education mandates in 12 states, public school curricula in these states, which include instruction about the path to Nazi genocide and the annihilation of 2/3 of Europeans' Jewry, are being enacted. And Kentucky is the latest state to pass this legislation. I have formally asked the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust to introduce similar legislation in our state house. My work with the Holocaust Speakers Bureau, going on 11 years, has been fulfilling and redemptive. Testimonials from local students and teachers are proof positive that this work is making a difference. On this day of Yom Kippur, I am hopeful and optimistic and ask that you be as well. The shofar inspires us to rise above despair and embrace the promise of a better world. Together, collectively, we will thrive and continue to do good work. A survivor told me, it is possible, even when surrounded by evil and hate, to do what is right. Let us remember the words of Anne Frank. How wonderful it is that no one need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. Thank you. Gemar Chatima Tova.